Well, hello everyone. Welcome. You are listening and watching Rashkin Report. My name is Yuri Rashkin. Press like, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. We are so close to 100,000 subscribers. It's remarkable how close we can be without crossing that threshold. I was hoping that today during our stream, maybe we would. Let's see what happens. I am super excited to welcome back to Rashkin Report retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. Ben, welcome back to Rashkin Report.
Thank you very much for letting me come back. And I love your opening now. I don't know who did all these caricatures of you, but I like your new opening.
Thank you very much. Trying to have some fun with this. Artificial intelligence, there's got to be some good in this. Well, what I'd like to try to figure out today is Ukraine's path to victory. Zelensky has a plan, and I think people are having their own visions of what could be successful, safe future for Ukraine. Could it be more path of West Germany or South Korea or Israel? How do you see Ukraine's path to victory?
Well, I think critical to the path to victory is going to be the United States wanting to see Ukraine actually achieve a victory, to see Ukraine be able to reestablish sovereignty over all of its territory, i.e. the 1991 borders. We haven't done that yet. We talk about being with Ukraine for as long as it takes, but we haven't actually committed to them achieving that sort of victory. Now, there is growing pressure on Ukraine to include from some in the United States to come on, let's negotiate with Russia, let's bring this to an end. And there are different formulas or models that are put forth, such as the East German, West German model, or the North Korea, South Korea model, or something like that, or the Finnish model. What's two problems with that for me, assuming that Ukraine is willing to do it, because that's the first step. Ukraine has to be willing to do it. Is that with those models, I have zero confidence that Russia would live up to any agreement that they sign. I mean, it's pretty thin history of Russian governments living up to agreements unless there was a very, very powerful enforcement protocol in place. So I'm skeptical there. And secondly, the Korea model and the East German, West German model both required huge amounts of American soldiers to be stationed there, and I don't see that happening. I don't see that political will to have a bunch of American or German or British troops stationed in Ukraine. I'd be for it, but I'm skeptical that any administration is willing to do that.
That is an interesting point, because all of those scenarios involve American troops.
Yeah, and so, I mean, if we had the will to do that, then why don't we have the will to help Ukraine win this war? I mean, not one American soldier has broken a fingernail yet. I mean, if we would, and we've provided ammunition and a lot of old equipment. That's what we've done. We haven't even used all of our economic tools. So why would somebody think that we'd be willing to put American troops on the ground in Ukraine? So I think the political will to do that is more than enough will to help Ukraine actually win the war without American troops.
Does that mean inviting Ukraine to NATO? Can that be the one thing that Vladimir Putin is afraid of? Although he gets involved in our elections, but he's not shooting rockets at NATO countries. Is that, and in that case scenario, is there a possibility, do you see, of West German scenario where part of the country that is controlled by government in Kiev, 80% plus, gets the warranty, the security guarantees that Finland and Sweden got, while the rest of the country remains de facto under Russian control, although de jure, no?
Certainly that's a possibility, and that may be very tempting, assuming that the United States and the other members of the alliance would agree to that sort of arrangement. I'm not convinced that all the countries of NATO are prepared to do it. Certainly, Ukraine should be in the alliance, and that is the only real security sort of guarantee, other than having a bunch of American troops actually in Ukraine. So I don't know. I think that the problem, the difference between the East Germany, West Germany, that sort of thing, and Ukraine being a Ukraine and a Eastern Ukraine kind of divided up, is that Crimea is so important to the economy, economic reconstruction of Ukraine, the seaports for export. If Russia controls Crimea, that means that Azov Sea is closed forever, and that Ukraine could never rebuild Mariupol and Berdyansk, even if they were liberated. And then Russia would forever be in a place where they could disrupt things going in and out of Odessa, for example. And so, all of a sudden, for this to work, every nation in NATO would have to be willing to go to war over Western Ukraine. But right now, they're not even willing to help to allow Poland to shoot down Russian missiles that are hitting targets in Western Ukraine. So, I mean, that would require a change of attitudes that I'm not confident is there.
I think that's a really important point that I don't know that I've heard you make, is that Crimea is crucial to economic recovery of Ukraine.
Yeah, back at the Munich Security Conference, I spoke to a vice president of one of the two largest investment firms in the world, and he said that people with big money are going to be very reluctant to invest in Ukraine if they anticipate a resumption of the conflict. Now, there will be some funds that will be made available, different agencies and so on, but I'm talking about the hundreds of billions that would be required to really rebuild Ukraine. They're going to be reluctant to put that kind of money in there. And if that's the case, then Russia will have achieved what they wanted, which is to prevent Ukraine from becoming this, economic, liberal, democratic country that's prosperous right on the border of Russia.
And you also indicated that you feel that the stance of the West right now is such that their unwillingness to help Ukraine at the level at which Ukraine needs assistance speaks of like their hesitance to accept Ukraine to NATO. It's kind of like an indicator. If they were more serious, if they were really ready to fight, then they would help more.
Yeah, I think that's why I don't think this idea is going to go anywhere, because it would require a change of heart and attitude by so many different countries about defending. That's what it means. If Ukraine comes into NATO, everybody's prepared to go help defend Ukraine. And why would they all of a sudden change their mind if they're not willing to help defend Ukraine right now? I think the Russians will test this immediately to see if we're really serious about it. And I think this is a diplomatic game that people in hallways talk about. Oh, I got an idea. If we do this and we do this, then it'll solve the problem. But that won't solve any problem. I think actually until Putin realizes that he is not going to win, then this is going to keep going on. Only when he realizes that the West is absolutely committed to helping Ukraine win, then does he back down. But right now, he's pretty confident that we're not committed, because you got all these geniuses are out there coming up with clever ideas of how to bring about into the fighting, and that they're willing to have Ukraine give up 20% of its country. And what kind of a message does that send to China?
Well, and that's exactly what I was going to ask you. What is this partial acceptance of Ukraine? What message that sends to China? Exactly, because I'm not really clear. I was hoping you could help clarify.
Well, what it tells China is that the West does not have the political will to do what it takes to help Ukraine defeat Russia. I mean, think about this. And you already know this. I imagine most of your audience knows this. If you add together the economies of the European Union, so no UK, no US, no Canada, the economies of the EU dwarfs Russia's economy. But yet you've got people crying that we can't make enough ammunition. That is absolutely lack of political will. We have not used all of our economic tools to stop Russia from selling oil and gas to China and India, which is how Russia gets the money to buy ammunition from North Korea and drones from Iran. That's what keeps them in the war. We haven't been willing to do that. because we're more concerned about disruption of the gas prices, gas market in America during an election year. So there's no reason that Russia should still even be in this war, but because we have failed, they're still doing it. And Putin thinks right now that he just has to wait us out. And so the Chinese look at that and say, okay, so the U.S. can be deterred by just the talk by Russia that we're going to relook our nuclear doctrine, or we might do an exercise with a nuclear weapon in Belarus. And these are just the weekly reminders that Russia has nuclear weapons. And they do that because they see that we are have an excessive fear that they might use a nuclear weapon. That's part of the message to China, that we can be deterred just by the mention that they might use a nuclear weapon.
Looking at it from military, political point of view, considering today's situation, what's known about the resources of different sides, do you feel that military victory of Ukraine over Russia is possible? If we mean by victory restoration of Ukraine's sovereign territory, at least using military means, do we have capacity? Is that possible?
It'll never happen purely by military means. You have to have, for officers in our education, we learned this very simplistic construct called DIME, DIME. Those are the four major categories of national power: diplomacy, information, military, and economy. And so when you start thinking about how do we apply national power or alliance power, everybody in the military prefers capital D, capital I, little m, and capital E. Use all of our economic tools, and then the military as sort of backs this up. It's the threat of military force. And so if we were serious about helping Ukraine win, there would be no way that Russia would be able to export oil and gas to China and India, or that parts, some of which are made in the United States, go to India, and then from India they end up in Russian missiles that are used against Ukrainian cities, or that North Korea is able to transport millions of rounds of artillery ammunition or ballistic missiles from North Korea into Russia. We haven't figured out a way to stop that, or that Iran is providing drones and ballistic missiles to Russia. I can't believe that we have not figured out a way to stop this without escalating into a direct US/NATO versus Russia conflict. So we haven't used all of our economic tools yet.
Do you feel that all this conversation and talk about how we want Ukraine to win, and I think it's great to hear both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden speak of their desire to see Ukraine's victory, even though they're not specifying exactly what it's going to take. But do you feel that perhaps we need Russia to lose even more for like our national security purposes, that Ukraine's victory is great, but Russia's loss is so much more?
I don't know that I would divide it up like that, but I'll take your point. And yes, it is to the interest of Europe and the United States that Russia is defeated, that Russia's imperial ambitions are defeated, that Russia is required to live within its own borders and becomes a responsible nation. I mean, you've got a Russian people, enormous natural resources, but as long as you have the type of government, the regime that they have, we're going to forever deal with this, what we're having to deal with right now. So it's in the interest of the West that Russia is defeated, and that the regime is forced to, or that the Russian people finally decide, this is enough. I think the average Russian probably has suffered as much as any of their neighbors because the government has such total control of all the resources, and a few people get incredibly wealthy. I mean, a country like that with all of the natural resources should be doing what Norway does, where everybody gets a dividend from the oil. I mean, there's a national fund, and people benefit from it, from the resources. There's none of that happening in Russia.
But I wonder about all the mistakes that our analysts have made in run up to the war, and now that we are or the big invasion, and now that we're looking at those mistakes, makes wonder about what other mistakes we could be making in partially perhaps overestimating nuclear threat, but those kinds of things. It is, I think, relevant that we now see that we overestimated, or our specialists have overestimated Russian capabilities, and they underestimated Ukrainian capabilities. And now, how do you see this kind of development, the trend in analysis of the war?
So I agree 100% with you that we have overestimated the likelihood that Russia might use a nuclear weapon, and therefore we self-deter. We're not even allowing Ukraine to use weapons that we provide to hit Russian airfields from which these aircraft take off and then drop glide bombs into apartment buildings and hospitals. Um, General Breedlove, my former boss, he uses the metaphor that it is better to kill the archer than try to intercept all the arrows. And that's what we should be helping Ukraine do. But instead, we self-deter because Russia says, oh, if Ukraine uses American weapons against targets inside Russia, that will be escalation, and we'll have to deal with that. Well, that's the continuation of the threat, and we fall for it every time. We have also, I think, misread what's happening on the ground in the east of Ukraine. I mean, it's terrible fighting. Thousands of people are getting killed, especially Russian troops. And you can read an article almost every day. It talks about the advance of Russian forces. They're continuing to advance. And then when you look on the map, where is it we're talking about? The Russians finally captured Avdiivka back in February, and here we are in the middle of October, and they have not been able to go the full 60 kilometers, which is about 35 miles, from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk. That's at the cost of tens of thousands of casualties. They haven't been able to take the next city. Now, they finally took Vuhledar after years of trying, but this is still in the far eastern sliver of Ukraine. So why is it characterized as, well, Ukraine's losing? No, they're not. After 10 and a half years with Russia having every advantage, they've lost 600,000 killed and wounded, thousands of vehicles. Their defense industry is totally dependent on help from China and oil and gas sales to China and India. The great Russian Air Force has failed its two principal tasks. They failed to get air superiority, and they have failed to interdict the lines of communication. They haven't destroyed one train or convoy bringing stuff from Poland into Ukraine. And the Black Sea Fleet, which has a really cool name, is a really crappy navy. And the Ukrainians have defeated the Black Sea Fleet, even though Ukraine does not have a navy in the traditional sense. So I don't get. And by the way, of course, you've got Ukrainian troops now or have established a bridgehead in the Kursk Oblast. So I don't know why the narrative is that Ukraine is losing.
Well, I think that the narrative is because there's a lot of people talking about how the West needs to urgently provide more assistance, that Ukraine is under attack, that another city, another town, another village, it's creeping, but it's kind of like that's the perception that we get. Are you saying that the reality is different?
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying. Now, of course, it's hell if you're the commander or a soldier outside of Vuhledar and Pokrovsk. I mean, because all day, every day, you've got Russians delivering glide bombs and other weapons, and Ukraine still does not have enough long-range capability to strike back, to take out the Russian artillery, the Russian headquarters, the Russian logistics. So they're on the receiving end of that. But I spoke to a Ukrainian officer the other day, and who had been out there on the eastern end, and he said they can feel the difference, that the Russians are exhausted out there as well, and that also the enormous advantage that Russia had in artillery ammunition is beginning to change as well. So This is the way it always is in wartime. That you got both sides in this heavyweight match slugging it out, and it really is a test of will, and waiting for the other side to crack. And I just can't believe that if we didn't commit to helping Ukraine to win, that they would not be able to win this war. Think about, we went almost 8 months without providing any ammunition to Ukraine because the Congress, what it did, you'll remember there was a Ukraine aid package, Israel aid package, and a border package were all tied together, and that sat there for 8 months until it was finally passed. So Ukraine got nothing from us during that period of time, and yet Russia could not exploit that. So that's why I am very skeptical about Russia's ability to actually win as long as we stay committed.
Can you share a little bit of your take on how decisions are made in the chain of command that you're so familiar with? Because I think there's a certain educational component that is crucial to our conversations, because people need to understand the level of information that a retired commander has versus current, and how just the decisions are made with there's this characters in this almost like a drama that we live in. Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, Joe Biden. What role, how does all of this work? How do you see this chain of command work out?
What an interesting question. And you're right, there are characters, names that we all see, and these are hardworking, intelligent, patriotic people. I happen to disagree with a lot of them when it comes to this, but they're vilified in social media, which I think is unfair. At the end of the day, the president is responsible for establishing the strategic priority and the strategic objective. And I spoke the other day with let's just say a very, very senior defense official. This official, when I asked him, I said, what is our strategic objective? It was in an open forum, a kind of a working lunch at a forum. And I said, what's the objective here? What is the U.S. strategic objective for Ukraine? And this person said that the strategic objective is to help Ukraine be in the best possible negotiating position. And they said, and for Russia to lose. I said, well, that's not a strategic objective. I mean, that's not an objective that's good for us. I mean, and then this person said, well, it's not our call, it's up to Ukraine. That's bullshit. Of course it's our call, because this is not just about Ukraine. Ukraine is a part of this contest between the liberal democratic West and an authoritarian autocratic Russia, with China watching to see, are we willing to do it? So here is a defense official I've known this person for a long time, super intelligent, hardworking, expert on Russia. And that was what they said is the objective. And I just was dumbfounded. I had suspected that, but to hear them say it that way in a public venue was very frustrating, that that's the objective, because it makes it sound like, well, hope Ukraine wins. We'll give them some stuff, but it's up to them how it turns out. No, that's not how the United States or the West needs to be looking at this conflict. Instead, this is about our strategic interest. And we're lucky that Ukraine is fighting like crazy for their own survival. And they're willing to do all the fighting if we just give them the tools. And we're not willing to do that. And it goes back to this excessive fear of a nuclear escalation.
Perhaps they would rather not say that they want Russia to lose, that they would rather, I don't know, would rather just put the responsibility for decision making on Ukraine, or somebody decides, not us. Ukraine decides.
Well, this person did say that part of the objective was that would Russia suffer a strategic loss. What does that mean? I mean, I've heard that now for the last 2.5 years, that Russia's already lost strategically. What does that mean?
Well, okay, that's let me ask you this way then for you. Do you feel that Russia's loss means Putin regime changes, or Russia collapses as the country? And because Putin likes to think that he is Russia and Russia is Putin and that kind of thing, but they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think, does it mean that if Putin's regime collapses, the country necessarily collapses? Do we in the West think about it in those terms and distinguish those two topics?
So I'm reluctant to say that, yes, our desired end state is that the regime collapses, although I personally would applaud that, and we should be trying to accelerate that by helping Ukraine defeat Russia, and then let Putin explain to his own people, and especially the oligarchs who are ready to toss people out of windows, explain how they went from what they thought would be over in 3 days to now their navy's destroyed, their air force is destroyed, they've lost most of their army. Nobody wants to buy their crap equipment anywhere in the world, and they also have been replaced by the United States or somebody else as providing oil and gas instead of everybody being dependent on Russia. Let Putin explain that to his own people. He may or may not remain in power, but it's not just about him. I mean, if he fell off of his horse today, there'd be another guy like him that would step forward. So it's got to be, I think, the way Gary Kasparov talks about, until the imperial ambition has been crushed, there's not going to be a change. It's not just about Vladimir Putin.
I wonder, because this chess match is many multi-dimensional, and it's even grand master of chess, who can see far and wide, may not see all the things at the same time, but Gary is still, he's still amazing. So then let's shift to the other part of this equation, because I think we on this channel understand that they're interconnected, but many listeners, many viewers, many people interested in even politics do not see the connection between Russia, and Iran, and Ukraine, and Israel, and how does all of this work together. But what is your opinion? Because we are now a year into since tragedy of 7th of October 2023, and of course that takes our eyes a little bit off Ukraine, because there's only so much attention, resources, and everything. But on the other hand, Iran is now sucking up the resources that they could have sold to Russia. Yeah. Potentially. How do you see all of this shaking out? Is this a loss or win for who?
This is an excellent point, and I agree with you, Yuri, that these are connected. And in fact, the sooner we connect them in our own strategic approach, Russia's war against Ukraine, Iran and their proxies against Israel, North Korea, and China, these are all parts of one strategic whole. And the sooner we start thinking about it that way, the sooner we will make sure we have the right alliances and partnerships. We get our industrial capacity cranking out ammunition and other things that we need to be able to have the ability to defeat Russia, defeat Iran, isolate Iran, isolate North Korea, and send the message to China that they do not want to violate sovereignty of the Philippines or other countries in the South China Sea or Taiwan. So it's about getting organized for victory. And the place I would start is exactly where you talked about it. Help Ukraine defeat Russia, and then Iran has lost its only friend. Iran has no friends in the world. I mean, none of the Arab countries around Iran like them, want to do anything with them. They are sworn enemies for religious reasons as well as historical and geographical reasons. So, and ethnic reasons. So, if Russia is defeated, Iran is isolated, and then I think that they are less capable of supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. At the same time, if Israel is effective at inflicting significant damage on Iran here in the coming weeks, Iran is less willing or able to send drones and ballistic missiles to Russia. So really, from a U.S. perspective, it's to our advantage, help Ukraine, help Israel, and then you are defeating or diminishing two of the biggest threats that we face. Almost all the problems in the Middle East you can trace back to Iran, and obviously most of the problems in Europe you can trace directly to Moscow. So I think I see connections here. The key for me will be, can we think strategically enough and do enough to help Ukraine actually win on that side? But also, Israel has got to be careful here that they don't, because of hubris, overreach. I think they're looking. Obviously, they're going to hit back against Iran somewhere, maybe even in the next day or two. I don't know. They have inflicted huge damage on Hezbollah. They have killed a lot of Hamas fighters, but they've done that in a way that maybe has guaranteed a continuation of the conflict because of the thousands of innocent Palestinians who have also been killed, and the refusal of the Netanyahu government to look towards a two-state solution. So Israel's got to be careful, and we have to be careful that they don't overreach and get involved in something that they can't control. I imagine that they've looked at attacking Iran's nuclear program. They've looked at attacking Iran's oil fields, but probably for now, the most likely thing that they will strike would be Iranian military capabilities and save the other things for maybe a next phase if necessary.
So, in that context, do you feel that the West has the capacity, or I guess the United States / Israel have capacity to defeat Hamas and Hezbollah? It's a question of resources in this war of attrition. Do you feel that Israel is capable of winning this war?
Well, this is a great one where you have to define what is winning. And I mean, the place is never going to be in our lifetime totally at peace, where everybody just sort of gets along. I mean, it's going to take time to finally, and the two-state solution, which has been the policy of every U.S. administration for decades, may be unreachable anytime soon. But it's the kind of thing that is going to that will be needed if we want Arab countries to help normalize relations with Israel and vice versa, and to keep Iran isolated. It's hard to imagine a situation where there is no Palestinian sort of arrangement with Israel continuing to have to to administrate the Gaza Strip. I don't see that. These continued illegal settlements that will just keep the pot bubbling, which is not a good thing for Israel. I think they definitely have had huge success against Hezbollah. The way the Mossad had penetrated there and the targeting is just incredible. I think we'll all be studying this for a long time, and not only getting Nasrallah, but also the mid-level leadership. It's like taking all the sergeants and junior officers out. What impact that has is significant. But I don't think Israel really wants to get back into the business of occupying southern Lebanon again, nor do I think they really want to have to occupy Gaza. So those are the things they'll have to consider.
All right. And American politics. Well, before we get to politics, a couple of questions from our viewers. This is Vasil from Odessa. Given that Russia has learned to fight, dug in, and increased the production of weapons, is there such a quantity of weapons in the West, soldiers in Ukraine, to reverse this situation on the front line?
I absolutely believe that. I mean, look, we haven't even tried. In the U.S., we haven't even tried yet to actually deliver what's needed. I mean, the equipment that's been provided, some of it's new stuff, but I mean, the technology is all 80s and 90s technology. HIMARS, Patriot, Abrams, Bradleys. These were all things that were developed in the 70s and the 80s. Ukrainians are building drones on their own, and we haven't even provided, our best drones to them. We have been dragging our feet about getting aircraft to them, ammunition production. This is not the same sort of sense of urgency that we had in 1941 and 42. where we were determined to win, and the same is true elsewhere. So the potential is there. So it's not about can America make enough ammunition and weapons. This is about political will, and we definitely have not demonstrated the political will yet to do that. Now, the other part of that question was a good one. No, are there enough Ukrainian soldiers? There absolutely are enough Ukrainian men and women, but the government has failed the Ukrainian government has failed to establish what we would call the institutional army. That's the part that does recruiting and training and education to provide soldiers to the operational army, the field force. And so I think Ukraine is dealing with their own cultural issues, legal issues about how to get enough women and men into the armed forces. And, I live here in Frankfurt, and there are a lot of Ukrainian men, military age, walking around in Germany, Poland, Romania, a lot of really nice big cars with Ukrainian license plates driving around. And I think this is something the government has got to address this.
No question. General Hodges, let me ask back to politics now. Let me frame it this way. Our viewer writes, General Hodges, greetings to you and bless you. I would like to ask you, General, by your estimate, how many of U.S. military personnel support Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in upcoming election? Like, how about that take,
Well, of course, I'd be guessing. I don't know, but my sense is probably a larger percentage support former President Trump than I would like to see. I mean, I don't know how a veteran who took an oath to support and defend the Constitution could also be a supporter of a guy who clearly doesn't respect our Constitution, and also is shown through his actions he really doesn't understand or care that much about veterans. At the same time, I know an awful lot of retirees that support Vice President Harris. What I don't know is inside the ranks today. I asked a friend of mine who's a colonel, I said, so what's it like out there? I mean, how are people? And he said, sir, you can be confident that the women and men of the U.S. Armed Forces are going to do their duty, whoever the president is. That's always been an important part of our culture, that our oath to support and defend the Constitution did not depend on who the president was. And so almost always, with a handful of exceptions, of course, people are going to do the right thing. But there is a sense among some senior officers that if Mr. Trump is elected and he comes back, that almost all the top leadership would be sacked immediately. And then the president would nominate a whole new slate of Chief of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, chairman, all these things, and which means that he would be doing that because he would be concerned about loyalty and personal loyalty to him. And that concerns me, that there would be some kind of a litmus test other than your oath to support and defend the Constitution, that probably there would be something where they would have to say something to demonstrate they're personally loyal to him, which is absolutely anathema to what we're all about.
Just story broke that former President Donald Trump, per latest book from Bob Woodward, has had several communications with Putin, including since he left office, not Putin, unfortunately, but Donald Trump. And this is a recent communication. Do you feel that these kinds of revelations can change anybody's mind, or should they change anybody's mind?
They should. They should change minds, but I think as I look at the American political situation right now, people are so dug in on their positions. And the things that we hear don't seem to really. It's hard. I don't see a lot of movement happening here in the last 4 weeks. It's going to be more about who people, both sides mobilizing their voters, people coming out to vote. I don't think there's a lot of Trump supporters who, if they heard that, they would go, "Oh my God, I didn't realize that that's what he believed," and that they would switch. I think at this point, people are pretty stuck in wherever they are. I have friends and family members that are that way.
Well, in the conclusion, we have our viewer who says General Hodges for president.
I'm not sure I'd want to live in a country where I was the president.
If you were president, how would you respond differently to these crises? Because you would be acting politician and having to do all those things. What would you do differently if you were president?
Well, well, what's an interesting question. I think of three things right off the bat. Number one, I would make sure that I'd focus on a strong domestic policy, because a strong foreign policy comes from having a strong domestic policy, meaning, our economy, but also that people have confidence in our institutions. They have confidence in the government. They have confidence in the courts. All those institutions which give us resilience as a country. That I would put a lot of effort into that. I would certainly emphasize the importance of our alliances, both NATO as well as with our allies out in the Indo-Pacific region, because we just don't have enough by ourselves to do it all alone. We need allies, and those would be areas that I would really focus on. And I think, as I've alluded to already, Russia, Ukraine, Iran, North Korea, China, these are all connected. And China is watching to see if we have the political will that's necessary.
Retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, it's always a pleasure to have you on this program, and thank you for all your media work that you do, speaking to different journalists and educating people, because it is so needed and so appreciated. Thank you, sir.
Yuri, I really appreciate the opportunity you give me, and I love your setting there. It looks like a great place.
Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.